Well, we're talking today to David Paich. This is really cool. David Paich just releasing his first solo project, Forgotten Toys, this past Friday. Listened to it a bunch over the weekend. I hear a spectrum. Okay, it's almost like a sampler of your styles, which, of course, I mean, you've written in all sorts of genres and such, but was there any sort of thought with, and I kind of know the background of how you, listening to some other interviews, of finding some of the material to put this together, but is it a safe way to say kind of that this is almost a sampler of what you can put out as a songwriter, arranger, musician, singer, etc.?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I've been doing it all my life through I've had the luxury of having a vehicle, having a band for a vehicle, and it's just I grew up. My father was an arranger, so I learned how to arrange through him, through apprenticeship through him, and he was my mentor. And so I just kind of continue on and keep trying to be the best arranger, songwriter that I can. And I think this was an example of just where I'm at the moment here, and the way I've collected odds and ends and pieces to a musical puzzle for the last several years, and we're able to frame them with the help of Joseph Williams and make a EP.
Steve Lukather's solo album came out 2021. You just mentioned Joseph Williams. Same came out of, right, like they were in sync with each other. Or was it February of 2021? I believe they both came out.
Right.
Right. And did you ever consider, prior to around this time, pandemic era, etc., doing any sort of a solo project? Was this a new thing? What was the first time you ever thought in your career, I might want to do a solo project?
Joseph Williams came by, and I was playing. I was rediscovering some pieces that I had forgotten about in my library, and Joseph, who was working on his solo album at the time, says, "You need to do a solo record." And Luke urged me too. He says, "Then all three of us can release our solo albums at the same time." So I got a little urging and a little prodding and a little bullying from my cohorts, and they wanted me to do one. So I love music and I love being in the studio. So I started collecting pieces and showing them to Joseph, and he helped me frame a lot of them and let me be the artist. So it was very productive.
From the beginning. As I started listening to it, and I'm streaming it right like the day it comes out, and I hear the transition go from forward to Will I Belong to You, and I look at, I think I was driving at that point, or maybe I was listening on my phone, and I looked down and I go, wait a minute, this is track 2. This felt like track 1 all together. It was that seamless. Okay. I know they're different pieces, but I didn't think of that. It didn't sound like a stop and go. Was that somewhat intentional to go from your own work, that kind of prelude, into the Gears sounding effect, and then into Will I Belong to You? How was that plotted?
Well, that was just came from imagination, and I had the forward piece at the very end there, and we knew we wanted to start with Will I Belong to You. So they just got hooked up magically, and in the spirit of Sergeant Pepper, I love surprises, and I love diversity, and I love the use of orchestral instruments with rock and roll. So I was able to capture a little magic there in the first 4 minutes.
I'm always fascinated by the order and the placement of songs in an album and making it more of a work of art as opposed to just here are 10 songs, we're just randomly throwing them on there. Was that the intention of going from that into, like, the first time eventually get around to Lucy at the end? Was that planned that way, to have the songs go in that order?
Not really. We just tried different orders. We have the luxury of having computerized programs that allow you to sequence and resequence the programs, where before that had to be done by cutting tape, and you had to go to mastering or having an engineer, in-house engineer. But this is we were able to try different sequences, and this one seemed to stick and seemed to make sense to everybody.
I love looking at the liner notes, seeing all of the legendary session musician names. You're one of them, obviously, but all of these other ones that are coming up, bandmates in Toto, other folks like Michael McDonald and Nathan East, et cetera, et cetera. But one name that I see come up a couple times, Fredrik Halland. How did you come across his work?
I was working with a friend of mine who's a neighbor at the time, Robin DiMaggio, who was producing Don Felder, and he had used Fredrik Halland on some of his productions. And I didn't know who he was, but Robin told me he was a great songwriter and had written something, I believe, for Justin Bieber. And he would play guitar and bass and also sang. So he would just, they would just take my 2 tracks and do overdubs on them and bring them back to me. And it allowed for the spacey kind of Eno-esque type of guitar playing and vocalizing and stuff that was just very spacey and very vibey, you know.
To that point, you mentioned Eno-esque, and on All the Tears That Shine, there is Brian Eno listed
right
with synthesizer. The names on here, I was alluding to some of them, but then if anyone's at all familiar with the history of pop and rock music, there are some that'll stand out even more, like Davey Johnstone shows up there. Eno, as we were just referencing. How did you,
right.
I mean, these are people you've come across in your career, obviously. How did you decide who to bring in, and what was the determining factor of, okay, I'd like you to be on this recording, on this particular song? Did they listen? How did that work out to arrange artist with song?
That was involved Joseph and myself as far as casting. We're pretty good at casting songs. And we were the ones that always had the discussion, well, what if we use this guy for acoustic guitar? What if we use this guy on electric and stuff? And Davey Johnstone, most people on that album I've known for years and have been friends with and still are friends with her. But Brian Eno, I have still not met to this day. He participated in the Dune album that I did back in the 80s, and I hadn't met him yet. With David Lynch, brought him in. And Robin DiMaggio, again, was the conduit. He'd worked with Paul Simon, and Brian Eno was co-producing on the record. And he played All the Tears That Shine for Eno, as the story goes. And Eno said, well, you should start the song off with something like this, and gave him that little beacon beeping sampled sound that's at the beginning and continues on through the whole song there. And so I'm grateful to Eno, and I can't wait to meet him. And thank you, Brian Eno.
That's a really awesome story. I perked up when I saw in the initial previews of the album that Ray Parker Jr. was going to be on there. I go, okay, well, that's cool to hear his guitar. And then it's on this kind of neo jazz track. And I mean, again, everyone has their own talents. They can do a variety of music. But again, something that was a surprise, and yet it layers right in well with that. How did you and Joseph decide to have Ray Parker Jr. play on that piece in particular and make that work so well?
Well, the album was just about done, and Ray called me and says, this is your first solo album, and you need to find something for me to play. I have to be on your album. So he insisted he was on my album. He called me, he told me, I want to find something for me to play on. So we had finished all these other tracks, but Lucy had this little funky kind of thing happening with it in the groove in the second verse. So I thought, that's got to be something Ray can do in there. And so he brought in his guitar and played like 2 notes and kept repeating just 2 notes, which is it's his signature for playing real simple parts in it. So we were able to get Ray on there, and I'm glad we did.
Yeah. So the generations of instrumentalists on this one collection of 7 tracks in total, you as a session musician, a session instrumentalist, and seeing where the industry has evolved over time. And of course, there's plenty more digitization and pre-recorded loops, etc. But here, all of these, where do you think that next generation is coming from, with some of the younger talent like Fredrik Halland, etc., coming up through there? Is there a viable new generation of session musicians that can thrive in the pop rock music industry today?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that so much recording is done at home, and they don't do it individually, track by track, as opposed to all playing in a room together. I think Nashville still has musicians that do sessions together, and they do them live. So I think that's kind of where the music's coming from now, as far as session players go, and guys that do it for a living frequently. Where out here, everybody sends files to each other. The universe we live in right now is technological, is streaming and files and digital, and so we send files over the phone, especially during the pandemic. We were forced to work with Zoom and Skype and FaceTime, and use the technology to recreate these sessions, like you hear on my record, that were done. A lot of them were done in individual moments.
Last question for you before I let you go. How many more forgotten toys are out there in reference to bits of music, songs, et cetera, that whether they are on another solo project, a Toto project, another project for another artist, et cetera, how much unreleased music is in your life that you have got stored?
I've got a little bit there. You know, I won't say that I have an abundance of stuff, but I'm just rediscovering it as I'm going through my library. I'm rediscovering stuff every day. So I'm not even sure as to the answer of that. I just know that I haven't found the ending, the end of the well of music here that's in my studio and in my computer that I've been just storing away for the winter, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that. It's good to know that there's potentially more to come. This was a fun listen. Forgotten Toys by David Paich, and those of us that grew up literally hearing your work on the radio, et cetera, and then hearing with all of these musicians. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this project. Anyone should give this a listen. David, thanks for taking some time and chatting with us this morning.
Hey, thank you so much, and I want to thank all of our fans and friends and family out there that have been loyal supporters of us for all these years, and we're very grateful and very blessed, and thank you very much, all of you. We couldn't